Good evening. Tonight we won't be wandering with noble lords or armoured knights. Instead we drift quietly through dim corridors alongside those who kept the castle alive, though they were rarely acknowledged. The scullery maid began scrubbing long before first light. The boy at the spit turned meat until his arms numbed. The laundress battled icy water with stinging fingers. A silent guard patrolled alone, watching shadows while others slept. This story belongs to them. Not one of glory or shining banners, but of quiet fortitude, of muscle aches and endless labour. 10 lives. 10 days. All lived under the same roof, but in 10 very separate worlds. If this kind of slow, gentle history soothes the mind, feel welcome to like the video and subscribe. Only if it brings genuine calm. Leave a comment too. Where are you listening from, and what hour has found you? It's always a joy to see how far these hushed tales travel. So exhale slowly, let the fireplace murmur, lower the lights, and let's begin. Not with crowns or coronations, but with those who served quietly in the rooms below. Morning arrives. Not because sleep has ended naturally, don't be silly, but because the cold stone beneath them has finished draining every trace of warmth. And, well, the cook stepped on them. Twice. That's how each day begins for the one lowest in rank inside a medieval castle. Meet the scullery maid, unpaid, unseen, and unclean. Unless, of course, there's grime to scrub or blame to carry. They sleep next to the hearth, the kitchen's only spot that's slightly less freezing than the yard. Their bed is a tattered burlap sack stuffed with straw so ancient it might remember warmer centuries. It carries the scent of burnt grease, damp wood, and a few crushed dreams. Their shift, the only garment they own, is coarse, colourless wool, acting as both uniform and sleepwear. It's been boiled twice this year. Maybe once, maybe never. They rise before dawn, before the rooster calls, even before the heavens stir. Why? Because the bread, the fire, the water, and the cleaning all must be ready before nobility stirs. Technically, it's shared duty, but truthfully, the others have mastered the art of vanishing when orders are given. This maid hasn't, or wasn't born clever enough to slip away. The hearth is cold. Embers, long since gone out, offer nothing. And a kitchen without flame is like a knight stripped of armour. Not useless, but rather pitiful. So they step into the darkness, barefoot. Last spring their shoes fell apart. Now they insulate a drafty door. The stones of the courtyard are slick, sharp. They collect kindling with fingers too numb to feel the splinters. Inside again, crouched low, they try to wake the fire. The wood is damp. The thoughts slightly bitter. Eventually a flame dances to life. Their hands hover above it until the stiffness fades and the fingers seem human again. Now comes the water. The castle has no pipes. It has them. They carry wooden buckets from the well, heavy, unwieldy, brimming. Balanced on a wooden yoke, digging into thin shoulders, trip after trip, arms aching, spine complaining, knees trembling like soft porridge. And this is all before the day has properly begun. As the others drift in, yawning and stretching with bed-warm eyes, the scullery maid is already deep in her. By the time they've reached the well for the 4th time, no one acknowledges them. Not a glance, not a word. They've become furniture with legs. Nothing more. The cook storms in, a thunderclap wrapped in irritation, already glistening with sweat. She bellows commands, gripping a wooden spoon that's long since turned into a tool of discipline. There's yelling about the stew pot, still crusted. That's the signal. Time to scrub again. They scrub until knuckles crack. There's no soap. That's a luxury for the rich, or perhaps the damned. Instead, they make do with ashes, sand, and lye, assuming anyone remembered to prepare it. The lye stings. The ash scratches. One hand bears a burn hidden beneath a thickened callus. The other somehow worse. The scullery pretends to be a workspace, but really it's a punishment cell. No fresh air. A single window, blackened permanently by soot. The air smells of meat boiled too long. And something less pleasant, unnamed. Most hours pass hunched at greasy basins, scraping old fat from deep pans, swatting away rats with a soup ladle. Yes, rats, they rule here. The workers, just tolerated. Mid-morning comes, they've not eaten. A crust of bread lies dry as stone, hidden in their apron. Behind the doorway they chew quickly, hoping not to seem suspicious, and fail. A kitchen maid sees, reports them. The punishment? Latrine pot duty for a full week. Later they advance to onion chopping. Essentially 2 hours of steady professional weeping. No one asks if they're all right. It's simply assumed they're grieving their life situation. Around noon, the nobility begins their first meal. The servants carry dishes, step where instructed, and most importantly, avoid all eye contact. Nobles prefer forgetting that servants possess faces, thoughts, or vision. They hold a pitcher for over an hour, never once asked to pour. Arms go numb. No one notices. That's routine. Afterward, cleanup resumes. The same trenches, now slick with gravy, bones scattered underfoot, half-eaten pastries, grape skins. Something that might have been a fish. Everything goes into the slop bucket. Servants aren't allowed to keep scrap, but maybe just once. A crust, a crumb, something small, just enough to stay upright. Afternoon fades into evening, another round of water, more root peeling, floors mopped, halls swept. Then, somehow they're blamed for the dog throwing up in the solar, even though they've never seen the room. Still, they were there in spirit. As daylight dwindles, dinner preparations heat up. Louder now, hotter. The hearth roars, smoke fills beams overhead, a pot crashes. The cook screams, fire nearly sparks. They beat it down with an apron and keep working. Finally, food. A bowl shared among 5 girls, mostly broth, a floating root, a grain of barley, and something unrecognizable, perhaps squirrel. Doesn't matter, it's edible. The nobles' dinner begins. Again they stand close by, part of the scenery, feet soaked, back stiff, voice unused except for, "Yes, cook," "Sorry, cook," or "Won't happen again, cook," whether or not they even know what occurred. Night falls. More dishes, more scrubbing, bones glued to the pans, like they were meant to stay. Medieval cement. Their hands now tremble, not from the chill but from pure exhaustion. A grunt from above signals they're done. Slowly they crawl back toward the sack near the hearth. The fire has faded, just soft embers glowing. They press close to the warm stone. Their tunic is still damp. The scent clinging to them is smoke, onions, and weariness. Someone is already asleep nearby. Someone else weeps softly. They don't ask who. They don't want to know. For a while they just lie still, not quite sleeping, not fully awake, mind drifting back to what life was before all this. They never chose this path. No one really does. A scullery maid isn't a dream or a calling. It's an inheritance. Their mother worked the dairy until her spine gave out. Their aunt scrubbed linens until river fever took her. Now it's their turn. This is the great medieval cycle. Hardship passed on like a bent ladle. There's no promotion here. They won't become a cook. They won't marry the steward. There's no sudden shift to become a lady's maid, learning delicate stitches in candlelight. That's a story, not truth. They'll grow older, hands stiffening with each season, until they're no longer fast enough to clean the pans. Then someone younger and cheaper will take their place. Someone who can still stay upright through fatigue. So they focus on small things. The pulse of the kitchen, the quiet treaties among servants, the survival codes no one speaks aloud. Never correct the cook. Always give the driest crust to the girl who's bleeding. Avoid the steward whenever possible. If noble footsteps echo behind, step aside at once, or risk being crushed, in body or in standing. Of course, there's always gossip, the only real currency servants can spend. Whispers claim the chamberlain shares a bed with the lady in waiting. Others insist he's smitten with the choir boy. Someone swears the red-bearded knight devoured 5 figs, then vomited into his own helmet. That one's likely true. Whenever there's a wedding or banquet, it's madness. Triple the guests, tenfold the chores. No space for breath, just relentless scouring and silent prayer. The nobles rejoice, the servants blister. By night's end, they feel not fatigue, but emptiness. Then comes winter, the worst of all. They labour through their own coughs, their own fevers. The same worn shift clings to them, layered with scraps. On some days, water freezes solid in their bucket before reaching the hearth. Still they go on. Because if they stop, someone else will take their place. And because they've always been told, silent suffering is a virtue, especially for girls like them. They had a name once. People used to speak it. Now it's just girl. Or, hey, you. Nothing special, no one heroic, merely another invisible cog turning the castle's wheels. And yet the castle turns because of them. Because they rise before the sun. Because they know how to quiet a squeaky hinge with goose grease. because they remember which bucket is clean and which holds mop water, because they scrub pans until they shine. Like coins they'll never hold. No one will carve a statue in their honor. No songs will be sung. But if they vanished tomorrow, the kitchen would crumble within a week. They don't sleep deeply. Their body twitches. Muscles ache. Dreams arrive in fragments. Green fields, boats gliding away, or sometimes nothing at all. They wake with a dry mouth and arms still burning. Another heavy morning begins, just like the one before it, and the one before that. No one seems to notice. No one, perhaps, except Lord Crumbs. They are the spit boy now. Whether that earns congratulations or condolences depends entirely on how one feels about rotating slowly in front of a fire, contemplating the decisions, or lack of them, that led here. They're likely somewhere between 8 and 12, small enough to crouch under the hearth, but old enough to keep from crying when the burns sting. Perhaps they were orphaned, maybe sold. Or maybe their parents simply had an exceptional gift for persuasion when calling this an opportunity. Their role is simple: sit on a stool, if there's one available, next to the great kitchen hearth, and turn the spit. Slowly, mostly clockwise, until someone decides otherwise. Occasionally they're told to pause, other times to speed up. Then it's too slow, then it's too fast again. Once someone accused them of lacking noble dignity, for blinking too often. It is hot, hot in a way that feels wrong, like existing inside a loaf of bread mid-bake. Their cheeks are always flushed, their hair forever damp. The hem of their tunic carries scorch marks and smells of every meat that's ever passed through that fire. Once upon a time they liked the scent of roasted duck. Now it brings headaches. The burns are constant. Blisters come and go. No one offers sympathy. It's expected they'll simply improve, get faster, more careful. Blister a palm, wrap it, eyebrows singed off, grow new ones. Fainting? Try to collapse somewhere that won't ruin anything. Breaks? They don't exist. The meat doesn't care if arms tremble. The fire doesn't mind sweat dripping into eyes. Nobles demand that their goose spins at the perfect angle, or metaphorical heads will roll. Sometimes literal ones, depending on how much the steward has been drinking. Feast days are worse. Larger spit, bigger birds, whole pigs, once a deer. It took 2 to rotate it. The other boy had a wandering eye and a cruel streak. He'd let go of the handle just to watch panic bloom. No one's seen him lately. They say he's in the kennels now. Hopefully the dogs are kinder than he was. Hours pass without shifting. Knees lose feeling. Their back seizes. Once, a foot went numb so completely they feared they'd gone lame. The steward called it dramatics, and threw a turnip at their head. The kitchen is chaos. Voices yell, pots boil, metal clashes, trays of oysters and wine crash into elbows. Through it all, they remain the calm centre. Invisible. Forgotten. But if the roast spins unevenly, the blame finds them. Eventually the meat is done. They help lift it off the spit. The fat hisses, grease splashes, flinching earns scolding. Hesitating? A slap. Then, it's on to the next roast, or the stew, or the pies, or the cauldron that smells like fermented onions and quiet misery. They never quite know what time it is. Life is measured only in firelight and hunger. Sometimes, if fortune smiles, someone tosses them a bone. Not figuratively, but literally. A gnawed piece with just enough meat to pretend it counts as lunch. They eat it in the shadows, crouched low like some half-starved creature. And then, they continue. And then it's back to the spit. By late afternoon, the flames have painted their cheeks a weary red, and their lips have begun to crack from the dry heat. Soot stains every crease of their fingers. They've inhaled so much smoke that their cough sounds like it belongs to someone 4 times their age. Still the spit turns. Still their hands move. From above there's the clatter of dishes and the sound of laughter drifting down from the noble hall. That place is bright, with soft chairs, white bread, and no soot. They'll never step foot there. Their purpose is to stay down here, so the nobles don't have to think about what makes their comfort possible. Eventually the feast wraps up. That doesn't mean rest. It simply means another task. They help carry trays of half-eaten meat back down, careful not to spill. No bites for them. Only bones to scrape into the slop bucket. Goblets to rinse, spits to haul into the scullery for scrubbing. It's heavy, their shoulder aches. A blister bursts under one palm, but they pretend it doesn't. Someone calls out, the Lord wants a fresh roast prepared for his dogs. So they begin again. Tonight, once more, the hounds will dine better than they do. It's late. Their tunic clings to sweaty skin, their hair stiffens with grease, hands trembling. not just from exhaustion but from hunger as well. At last, a bowl of pottage, thin, watery, grain boiled soft with a few bits of turnip. They crouch in the corner and slurp quietly. No one speaks. Everyone's too drained to pretend they're anything more than moving parts. The knives must be sharpened, hooks cleaned, the spit spotless. If a trace of fat remains when the steward inspects, they'll be licking it clean with their own spit, if they're fortunate. If not, tomorrow means floor duty in the Lord's privy. Night creeps in like smoke. The shouting ceases. The pots settle. Even the cook falls silent. They settle near the fire's dying light. Too sore to lie down. Too wired to sleep. A rat scurries past. They don't flinch. There's nothing left in them for surprise. Their thoughts drift. To the time before the castle. Maybe they were a miller's child. Maybe a shepherd's. Maybe their family still exists. Or maybe they made peace with the trade. One fewer mouth to feed. There's no escape. The best they can hope for is that burns fade evenly, that their spine stays straight a while longer. If they're lucky, truly lucky, they might become an assistant cook by 20, if they last that long. Winter is merciless. The castle's stone is thick, but drafts still cut like knives. The hearth, in theory, offers warmth. In truth, it's exposure. One side of them cooks, the other freezes. They turn like the meat, a rotating skewer of exhaustion and frost. There are no proper shoes. Their feet are wrapped in cloth scraps. Each puddle is a trap. Knees pop like ancient hinges. Sometimes they wonder if they'll ever uncrouch. Fingers so stiff with cold and blisters that it's unclear if they're holding the spit or if the spit is holding them. Health? They don't claim it. Their cough has become a signature sound. Their skin peels, then splits. The scent of scorched fat never leaves. It might sound appetizing, but it only pushes others away. One forearm burnt so often resembles overcooked pork. There are no balms. The apothecary treats nobles. They're told to rub it with pig fat and keep turning. The kitchen has a strict order. They are below the kitchen maids, below the butcher's boy, below the one who fetches eggs. Even the dog begging by the door has a higher place. At least it gets scraps. Sometimes the steward gives a nod. That's the best part of their week. And now and then, not often but sometimes, they wonder what life might be like if they ever left. But then they remember, spit boys don't leave. They simply grow up to become different kinds of... Some servants grow up, others don't grow at all. And so they return to their usual place by the hearth. Legs tucked in, arms wrapped around tired knees. The flames have dulled, but their skin still throbs where blisters from yesterday have cracked open again. They gaze into the embers, wondering how it would feel to be warm without pain. They don't know. They never have. Beyond these walls, snow begins to fall. Within, meat sizzles quietly over the coals. Between those two worlds, forgotten, invisible, they continue to turn, just as they always have. Every town or castle needs someone to handle the waste that people would rather forget. That someone is them, a gong farmer. It's a medieval phrase that tries to sound polite, but really just means a professional remover of human filth. If it's gone into a chamber pot, they carry it out. If it landed in the latrine, they retrieve it. They're the bottom rung of the bottom ladder, scraping the very depths of society's cesspits. And strangely enough, it's a real job, one that pays more than many others. But don't get excited. The extra coin only exists because no one else will touch the roll. Their shift begins after dark, not because they prefer the night, but because no one wants to see or smell them under daylight. Markets ban them unless they've washed, not that washing helps. The odour doesn't scrub away. It lingers in skin and under nails. People cross streets to avoid the scent, pretending not to notice. Their tools are few: a rake, a bucket, and a shovel. Their uniform? Layers of thick wool stuffed with moss or rags to block the stench. It never works. The smell always wins. The task is simple. Visit the cesspits and excavate months' worth of decomposed, fermented, semi-liquid remains, before it spills into the streets. They climb down. Yes, down. Sometimes there's a ladder. If fortune smiles, a rope. But more often than not, it's just the edge and a hope. The stench hits instantly, like a brick wall soaked in sewage and hopelessness. It stings the eyes, coats the tongue, and raises doubts about every decision that led here. Breathing through the mouth? Futile. Now the taste joins the smell. Their boots squelch downward through the softened slope of rot. Some areas are ankle deep, others rise to the knees. In imagination it's bottomless, they rake through it all. The fresh layers are bad enough. But the older deposits, that's where the real nightmares rest. Grey sludge, black crusts, living masses that bubble and twitch like they've begun to think. They don't ask, they just dig. Through human waste, animal filth, broken pots, soaked straw, spoiled food, cloth scraps, and sometimes a rat. Once a chicken. They buried that one, out of respect. If luck allows, they find coins, dropped in haste by nobles. Those they keep, deserved. When the bucket's full, it's hoisted out, emptied into a wooden cart with groaning wheels that seem to curse their purpose, again and again, especially if there's been a feast. Always at night, under flickering torchlight, because no one above wants to witness the price of their comfort. They work in silence. No one speaks in a cesspit. And once the cart is loaded with what old records gently call night soil, they roll it quietly through the sleeping streets. The cart leaves its mark behind, damp tracks on the ground, a heavy scent in the air. Wherever they go, the breeze sags. If someone catches sight of them, it's followed by a gag or a muttered prayer. Once, a child hurled a cabbage at their head. They threw something back, not their proudest moment. They make their way beyond the town walls, out to the dumping grounds, usually near the fields, because, in a strange twist of logic, all that collected waste is reused, fertilizer, enriching the soil. The same nobles who avoid eye contact are unknowingly eating vegetables grown in their own refuse. That, they'd say, is medieval recycling at its finest. By early morning, the dumping is complete, but the work isn't over. They return to clean the tools. That means rinsing them in a pond already halfway spoiled. Boots, garments, hands, scrubbed as best as possible. But it never matters, the odour clings. Neighbours always know what shift they've worked. Some won't share a bench at meals, others won't share a table at all. They try not to dwell on it. They remind themselves it's honest work, necessary work. Without it, the castle would be wading ankle-deep in sewage by week's end. They're no hero, but they're the line between order and unbearable filth. Most days they eat alone. Bread tastes like ashes. Not from burning, but because everything around them carries the same charred scent, or worse. Ale becomes the safer drink. Water isn't trustworthy. Besides, sobriety feels like punishment when surrounded by such smells. Winter is the cruelest season. Not just from the chill, though the cold is biting. It's because everything freezes. The muck, the hands, even the breath that turns to frost, then turns to regret. They must crack through icy crusts with a shovel just to reach the warm, awful mess beneath. It's the only time warmth feels like a warning. Summer offers no mercy. Heat bakes the cesspits, sends stench floating through the air. Flies gather. Wasps arrive, drawn for reasons unknown. Sweat soaks through their shoes. They've tried vinegar, herbs, mint leaves. Nothing masks the smell. It only adds a floral note to the filth. People laugh behind their back. Smells like a gong farmer is an insult. Some assume they're dim-witted. They aren't. They know how to brace a ladder with one leg while hauling waste with the other. They know where the cesspit won't collapse after a rainstorm. They even know which torch oils won't ignite in methane pockets. That's chemistry, or something close. And the strange truth? They earn more than most servants. It's one of the rare medieval jobs that pays well. Not lavishly. They still sleep in a single-room hut on the town's edge. But it's better than being a cook's assistant or a baker's boy, because no one wants this job, ever. People would rather go hungry than go where they go. That's the trade, the curse, the paycheck. By night's end, the cart is empty. They roll it back to the yard. The shovel leans against a wall. They rest on a log, not because it's clean, but because it exists. When the smell is too strong, they sleep outdoors. A wife, if there is one, insists on it. The children say they smell like boiled cabbage and sin. And they aren't wrong. Eyes close, but the stench remains. It always does. Even in dreams, the scent follows. Their hands no longer look like hands. The skin is always cracked. Fingernails darkened with grime, no matter how long they soak. The calluses remain. They've stopped trying to scrub them clean. Soap costs more than what dignity used to mean. There was a time when they could smell flowers, fresh grass, or firewood burning. But not anymore. The nose hasn't broken in a physical sense, but something inside has dulled. Now everything just smells of decay. Even a cart of ripe apples rolling past would smell rotten to them. Their senses have been rewired. Occasionally the castle guards joke. They'll say things like, "Don't fall in," and then laugh, as if it's the first time that line's been used. They offer a polite smile, pretend to laugh. Once, one guard even pushed them toward the pit's edge, for sport. That time there was no smile. They don't dream often. But when they do, it's of something softer. Baking bread, or copying letters in a quiet scriptorium. But waking brings back the smell of last night's labour. So they rinse their face, adjust the sackcloth tunic, and return to the pit. Because even in dreams, someone has to carry the bucket. As dawn stretches pale across the sky, and the roosters begin their morning song, they haul one last bucket, scrape the last shoe, and breathe into the greyness. The castle will stir soon, blissfully unaware. The nobles will relieve themselves into gold-trimmed bowls, never wondering what follows after. And they'll vanish again into the margins, like the scent they carry. That's the job, that's the rhythm of their day. The gong farmer, cleaner of kingdoms, remembered by none, save for the flies. Still, they wear shoes. That alone places them above 3/4 of the castle's servants, stiff leather, curled at the toes. They squeak when walking, which is unfortunate, since silence is part of the role. They're apprenticed to the chamberlain now. That means ledger carrying, inventory memorizing, and pretending to know what protocol or accountability actually involve. They're not noble, don't be mistaken, but they are a servant with access. They enter rooms others only scrub. They see things most peasants couldn't name. Fetching parchment, recording numbers, staying calm when the countess screams about linens that reek of goat. These are their duties now. The day starts before the lords stir. They wake near the better hearth in the servants' hall. Not the one for boiling rats or warming piss buckets, the good one. They splash water on their face, smooth their hair with fingers, and brush the tunic sleeve clean. Appearance matters. The first job, candles. They walk the halls replacing stubs with new tallow tapers. Beeswax is reserved. For the chapel, the great hall. Everyone else gets the lesser kind, with its faint sheepish odour. Moving room to room they observe. That's the second duty, to notice. If the salt jar's low, they write it down. If the wine stores are short by 2 cups, they investigate. If a chamber pot overflows, someone else is summoned. Downward delegation. That's tradition. The chamberlain is already awake. He never seems to sleep. A narrow man, sharp-nosed, sharper in expectations. He smells faintly of ink and dried lavender. His robes never stain. Somehow he always knows when something's been missed. Sometimes even before the mistake is made. He speaks in tidy lists. 2 bolts wool, broadcloth, 4 barrels lamp oil. There was one visiting friar whose dietary restrictions bordered on heresy. They nodded, noted every detail, and silently hoped not to spill the ink again. The last time it happened, they were made to recopy an entire month's accounts by candlelight, while the steward sat nearby, chewing pickled herring directly into their ear. Their role was part clerk, part messenger, and often part scapegoat. If the linens vanished, it was blamed on them. If the firewood was damp, their fault again. If the lord's prized hunting dog chose the guest stairwell for its business, somehow that too became theirs to answer for. Mid-morning brought inspections. They trailed behind the chamberlain like a quiet, ink-stained shadow. He moved through chambers, tapping walls, lifting bed covers, sipping wine, sniffing rushes. They nodded, wrote, and tried not to breathe too loudly. Once they yawned during a tour. That single offence earned them an afternoon spent sorting dry peas by both size and shade. There was no one in the castle they truly envied, perhaps except the cook's dog. At least the dog could bark freely without consequences. Lunch wasn't a rest, it was a logistical storm. Who eats what, where, and when? Who must be seated 2 chairs apart to prevent an ancient family grudge from reigniting over a shared pigeon pie? They carried seating charts, corrected titles, and offered soft reminders, like how Lady Cressid still refused to speak to Lord Alric after the Lent wine debacle. Following the meal, accounts were reviewed. They sat across from the chamberlain in the solar, reading each entry aloud. Wax, dried fish, salt, horseshoes, ink, wool, barley, soap, barley again. The list seemed endless. Occasionally the chamberlain would pause and ask, "What's the weight of a cusk?" Or, "How many loaves from a stone of flour?" A hesitation earned a single lifted eyebrow, which was somehow worse than a slap. Then came the visitors, nobles from distant lands, wandering knights, cousins between estates. They arrived with trunks, pride, and complicated preferences. Rooms were assigned, linens recorded, Not because anyone would express thanks, but because someone absolutely would demand answers if anything went missing. They also managed the castle's keys, or more accurately, fetched them. The armory, the wine cellar, the upstairs wardrobe key, which opened nothing but remained essential. Each key was kept in a pouch, tied tightly to their belt. They reached for it often, fingers brushing it like a charm. Losing that pouch would be a catastrophe, possibly career-ending. Or worse, permanent latrine duty. By late afternoon, lists gave way to real tasks. A shipment of salted herring was late. A bolt of velvet had vanished. A priest lay passed out on the chapel floor. The kitchen was out of vinegar. The stables needed hay. The steward had thoughts. They listened, they nodded, then quietly composed a formal response in the chamberlain's name. Sometimes the tasks turned stranger, like writing love letters. Yes, truly. A noblewoman insisted on communicating solely through notes. She dictated them while feeding her lapdog strawberries soaked in cream, hidden behind a curtain. They wrote her words, removed the worst bits, and delivered the wax-sealed nonsense to a knight who turned redder than a hearthstone every time he read one. Evening returned. Candles again. They passed through corridors with taper and snuffer, relighting what had faded, trimming what had grown too low. The halls were softer now. Nobles drank. Servants sighed, and they stood between both worlds, not truly part of either. But still, their presence is required in both places. They make another round to the guest rooms, fluffing the rushes, straightening the curtains, and ensuring no one has died, spilled wine, or disappeared in a romantic dash without properly filed notice. By now their feet ache. The pounding in their head is steady, and their fingers are marked by wax and ink. They haven't eaten since morning, but the first bite won't come until the chamberlain has had his meal and remembers to dismiss them. Sometimes he forgets. They sit outside his chamber for what feels like an eternity, while he recounts tales from his younger days, to a page boy too polite to yawn and too young to care, a child who dreams of armour and honour. Meanwhile, they drift in and out of a shallow doze, chin tucked in palm, stomach folding in on itself. Eventually the chamber door opens, a flick of 2 fingers, and they are dismissed. A bow. A soft thank you. Then retreat. Back to the servant quarters. Their bunk is narrow, the hearth has gone cold, someone else has stolen their blanket. Again. They lie down half-dressed, eyes tracing the beams above, and wonder if this is what power smells like. Tallow, ink, sweat, and lavender. Once they believed working near nobles would be thrilling, that secrets would be spilled, and the machinery of power laid bare. The secrets have come, yes, but they've been about hemorrhoids, missing tarts, and who finds whom intolerable. And power, it's merely more rules, more ways to be wrong. The chamberlain calls it discipline. What they've actually learned is weariness. How to disappear in plain sight, to be essential and yet unnoticed. They've grown fluent in silence, skilled in being there without being present. There's talk of advancement. Maybe they'll assist the steward one day, perhaps sell her books. More likely, they'll keep doing this until the spine gives out, or the eyesight fades after too many hours reading ledgers in dim candlelight. There's no pension waiting, just a slower unravelling. Still they return, because the work keeps things from falling apart. Because the castle needs someone to match salt barrels with winter rations. Because if they don't, someone will finally notice. They drift into sleep, counting grain sacks instead of sheep, and wake when the first bell tolls. It's still dark. They rise, stretch out stiff legs, and adjust the squeaky shoes. Time to relight the candles. Time to start again. The other servants barely tolerate them. They wear cleaner garments. They speak in terms like allocation and inventory. But they're not noble either. The upper floors forget their name even as they light hearths and refill inkwells. They live in the middle, a space where power drips downward and blame floods upward. Yet still they return, because showing up is the thread that holds the structure together. And tomorrow, like every day, they'll carry the records, count the candles, and be blamed when something, anything, goes awry. Their day begins in a barn that never truly rests. The horses shift before sunrise, warm breath rising in clouds, hooves tapping against straw-layered floors, sometimes stirring rats from the shadows. They are the stable hand. It means they shovel, they brush, they haul. They get kicked, often. Mostly they apologize to creatures who are more graceful, better fed, and often more respected. Their sleep comes in the loft above, though sleep might be generous. The boards are thin, hooves never stop, tails flick, a sigh here, a a stomp there, and now and then the unmistakable sound of something large relieving itself uncomfortably near their head. Their hands are already cracked by the time dawn threatens the horizon. Same boots, same tunic, same sour smell. They climb down the ladder. The cold greets them, sharp and unforgiving. They begin to muck out the stalls, one by one. Shovel, pitch, shovel again. It's not glorious, it's not even bearable, but it must be done, before the master of horse arrives, or else. They spend the morning with a split lip and a quiet lecture on self-control. Their movements are quick, but never rushed. Speed unsettles horses, and nervous horses are far more dangerous than irritated nobles. Nervous ones bite, rear up, and crush without warning. They've already lost the use of 2 fingers and once took a hoof to the ribs, left them coughing blood for a week. Still, they care deeply for the animals. Horses don't lie, they don't scream, they don't pretend to be better than others. The stable carries the heavy scent of hay, manure, sweat, and horse, somehow both worse and better than anything found within the stone walls of the castle. They hardly notice the smell now. Their nose stopped working like everyone else's long ago. They can distinguish the scent of a healthy stallion from one suffering colic. A nervous horse has a different breath. They know that too. In a world of people who speak too much and say too little, these animals simply make more sense. Once the stalls are cleared, they go for the feed. Sacks of oats, heavy and coarse, hay bales stacked in the loft, tugged down one at a time. They move carefully, remembering last winter's mistake, twisted their backs so badly they nearly blacked out. The master accused them of faking it and hurled a bridle at their head. Feeding requires precision. Some horses are timid, others are greedy. Some will bite if approached the wrong way. The scars on their hands tell those stories. Still they reach gently, offer soft pats along the neck, check hooves, whisper small things. Nonsense, but calming. The animals know their voice. They trust them, more than any noble ever has. Mid-morning brings grooming. Currying, brushing, cleaning hooves, detangling manes. Burrs are plucked, noses wiped, more dung removed. If the lord intends to ride, they polish every piece of tack until it gleams. Not for praise, but because the master of horse will see. And if anything is amiss, it's not the leather that'll be punished. It's their back. Sometimes nobles bring their dogs into the stables. Hunting breeds. Loud, twitchy, high-born, and low sense. They clean after them too. No one says thank you. When the lord suddenly announces a ride, and he always announces last minute, the stable erupts into motion. They saddle his best gelding, the one that loathes being touched. Every strap is checked 3 times. The bit is wiped, stirrups adjusted, always too short. Fashion beats comfort, always. Then they step back, silent, unseen. If the horse fidgets, it's their fault. If he slips on mud, also their fault. If he chips a nail, somehow still their fault. They'll be reminded for weeks. In the meantime, they carry water, sweep the yard, and stack more hay. The scent of leather and sweat clings to them. Shoulders scream, arms ache, muscles tear in places they didn't know could ache. Blood appears in places it shouldn't. Breaks come occasionally. But they offer no rest. They sit on a wooden stool, sip warm ale from a dented tin, and stare into the air, at dust motes drifting like tired ghosts. No talking. The jaw is sore from clenching. The body sore from simply existing. And the horses? They still need grooming. Winter makes it worse. Gloves don't stop the numbness. Water troughs freeze. And the horse's breath, in the frigid air, looks like smoke curling from dragon mouths. They break through ice with a hammer, just to make sure the horses can drink. At times they wonder if anyone inside the castle even realizes the stable has no insulation. In summer, they become a walking blister, soaked through tunic, undershirt, and spirit. Evening arrives carrying swarms of flies. They gather in every corner of the stable, buzzing like tiny persistent curses. The flies are waved away lazily while the last stalls are cleaned. One of the older mares has soiled her bedding 3 times today. Nerves. A storm must be near. They feel it, not in the sky, but deep in their joints. The shift in air says more than the clouds ever do. They sweep again, rake again, scrub the water troughs using a fistful of straw and an old brush that's been shedding bristles since before last winter. No one replaces it. No one notices, except them. The master of horse checks in once more before nightfall. If he's content, he grunts. If displeased, he shouts. They've learned to measure a day by how close that shout lands to their face. From the feed room, they sneak a few carrots. One goes to the grey mare, the one who never bites. Another for the chestnut. She only bites strangers. Both nuzzle their hand gently, soft muzzles pressing into skin. It's the only affection they receive all day. As the sun disappears, they climb the ladder back to the hayloft. Their bed, a loose pile of straw and rags that smells of mildew and saddle grease. No point undressing. They'll just have to pull everything back on in 5 hours anyway. They lie still, listening. To the horse's breath, to the wind nudging against the wooden boards. They drift off counting hoofbeats in their dreams. Come morning, they'll rise before the sun. Again. No one at court knows their name. To them, they're just boy, though they're nearly 17, and their spine cracks like a drawbridge with every step. When they pass nobles in the halls, noses wrinkle, not from rudeness, but because they smell of a life no one wants to imagine. Still, a few gestures remain. The kitchen maid leaves crusts. The blacksmith offers a grunt. Once, a knight gave them a silver coin for calming his stallion before a battle. They've never spent it. It's proof that they exist, that they matter. They're not foolish. They know there's no ladder from stable hand to steward. No enchanted brush that becomes a sword. They're not destined to be a knight, or even a squire, but they understand animals deeply. They can dress a wound, calm a frightened foal, and spot a limp before it worsens. That means something. Quietly. They've seen what happens to boys who can't take the weight. Some vanish, others break. Some are whipped one night and simply never return. No questions asked. So, they do their work. They keep their head down. Rain leaks through the roof. Hay rots in summer. In winter, breath freezes against rafters. But the horses remain. Breathing. Waiting. Trusting. And that most days is enough. Not always, but enough. So, they close their eyes to the sound of hooves shifting in straw, to wood groaning in its joints, to soft exhales from animals that have never judged them. And tomorrow it begins again. They are the stable hand, and the horses need them. They don't stay for praise. There is none. They stay because the horses know their voice, because they nicker when they hear their boots, because... In a world governed by commands, half-truths and consequences, there remains one quiet corner where they're trusted. Not for who they are, but for the way they move, the tone of their voice, the way they pay attention. And that kind of trust? It's rare, even behind castle walls. They wait to find a paw resting against their mouth. Again. It belongs to a turnspit dog, short-legged, long-bodied, and perpetually weary, like a sausage with unresolved trauma. He's sprawled across their straw mattress, softly snoring. His fur is sticky with kitchen grease and possibly duck fat. They don't mind. He's warm. And honestly, he smells better than most of the kitchen staff. They are the keeper of the turnspit dogs, the invisible, overworked, underfed link between noble banquets and a medieval meat treadmill. Yes, that exists. The dogs run, the spit turns, the meat roasts, and someone must make sure the dogs keep running, don't collapse, and definitely don't sit mid-roast. That someone is them. Their shift starts before the fire catches. They rise, stretch until the spine clicks, and immediately step in something wet. Hopefully water. Likely not. The dogs are already fidgeting. They sense what's ahead. They pull the first dog from the pile, a stubborn hound named Snipe. He gives a half-hearted nip, which is fair. This makes his third day straight on the spit. They scratch his ears, murmur a quiet apology, and guide him toward the kitchen. The fires are already lit. Smoke curls from the hearth. The cook is ranting about Swan again. They open the spit wheel. It resembles a hamster wheel, if the hamster weighed 30 pounds and suffered workplace trauma. Snipe steps in. The gate latch is shut. He begins to walk. The spit turns. A boar roast begins to slowly rotate, and now the work truly begins. Watch. Time. Bribe. Beg. The goal: keep the pace steady without exhausting the dog. If the dog slows, the meat cooks unevenly. The cook hurls things. Hot things, sharp things, or words that cut deeper. If the dog stops completely, the roast slips. The day is ruined. Once they were told they'd ruined Christmas. It was May. There are 4 dogs total, 2 on shift, 2 off. Not that any of them rest. They twitch in corners, gnaw on bones, whimper softly. Between rotations, the handler rubs their legs, whispers small reassurances, like a tired coach for canine gladiators. The wheels must be clean too, not because someone says so, but because the squeaks get inside the cook's skull. They learned that lesson last month, when a mid-banquet squeal earned them a ladle to the head. Occasionally the Lord wanders through. He doesn't speak, just nods vaguely at the meat, compliments its earthy flavour. That would be sweat, and likely a bit of dog hair. They accept the compliment. Feeding the dogs is always a gamble, officially no scraps from the noble table. But they do it anyway, because no one wants to run on an empty. Dried peas and an empty stomach aren't exactly ideal fuel for performance. So, when no one's watching, they slip the dogs small pieces of goose fat or crusts soaked in leftover gravy. The animals adore them for it, at least until one nearly bites off their thumb, which almost happened just last week. Burns are part of the routine. Their forearms resemble stretched parchment, marked and stiff. The kitchen behaves like a furnace year-round. In winter, it's a roaring wall of smoke and shouting. Come summer, it transforms into something closer to divine punishment. The fire never truly dies, not even after dusk. It smoulders through the night while they sleep nearby. Close enough to be summoned, far enough to be forgotten. They've breathed in so much ash that their nose bleeds soot. Their cough groans like a broken bellows, eyes always red, which conveniently conceals the tears. They once thought dogs were cheerful, devoted companions. But these are different. These are working dogs, bred not for affection, but for unending labour. They don't want love. They want bread. And if the food's late, they form uprisings. There was a day they entered the wheel room and found 3 of them sitting solemnly in a circle, chewing on their boot. Nobody taught them how to manage the dogs. Everything learned came through trial, error, and generous bloodshed. A stick rests nearby. Not used out of cruelty, but necessity. They hate using it. Truly. But sometimes the dogs simply stop. They plant their feet and look back with that wild, tired look. The look of something that senses it's part of a joke it was never in on. Each one has a name: Snipe, Button, Moors, and Guts, the difficult one. Guts only behaves if bribed with bacon grease. Otherwise he growls like thunder on the edge of a storm and snaps at ankles when off duty. Oddly, they believe Guts understands the world the same way they do. Weary, greasy, and clouded in smoke. Once a noble's child wandered into the kitchen, pointed at the spit wheel, and chirped, "Look, a spinning puppy." They smiled faintly. Then the girl's tutor pulled her away sharply, glaring at them as though they'd shown her something shameful. They didn't speak. They rarely do. Over time, their posture has changed. Now they hunch, shaped by years of ducking beneath low beams, crouching by dog crates, and hauling iron spits still hot from the fire. Their hands carry burns and calluses. Their knees throb when rain draws near. They are 17. They once dreamed of being a falconer, training birds, walking forest trails, leather glove on hand, eyes skyward as if reading the wind. These days they can't even hear birds over the relentless patter of paws spinning in a wheel. When alone, they sit by the back door, just out of sight. One of the dogs, usually Moors, the quiet one, curls up beside them. She asks nothing, just lies there, warm and real. And for a minute, maybe 2, they rest their head against her side. Then the bell rings again. More meat, more turning. The wheel never pauses. No one offers thanks to the dogs, or to them. At night they scrub grease from their arms using sand and quiet prayers. Then they curl into a nest of straw, listening to the gentle panting of resting dogs and the slow fading hiss of fat over dying coals. They dream of running, not to escape, simply to move. And always the wheel continues. Now and then they hear nobles praising the charm of rustic kitchens. What they mean is the swan on the spit, the herbs in the air, the copper pans hanging in rows. They believe those herbs came from a manicured garden, not from the sweat-drenched hands of a scullery maid picking by moonlight, barefoot and unseen. The nobles don't know they're there, don't know the dogs are there either. If they do, it's as a curiosity, a whimsical detail for the minstrels to romanticize. The loyal turning hounds of House Waxford, or some other nonsense crafted by people who've never smelled the work. Once they overheard a bard remark that turnspit dogs enjoy the exercise. They nearly choked on their own laughter. Patience, strange and stubborn, is something they've come to master. There are no arguments, no complaints, only movement. Feed the dogs, dress their wounds, clean the wheel, and hope the day ends without blood. They've seen worse. Last year a boy got his hand caught in the gears. He doesn't work here anymore. Whether he died or was simply reassigned, they never found out. Tucked behind a beam, they keep a small cloth pouch. Inside, a piece of hard cheese, a flower-shaped button, and a dog's tooth, lost by Guts during a particularly bad shift. They keep it like a charm, a reminder that even the fiercest dog can break. Their ears ring, from the yelling, the heat, the rhythm of the wheel. their joints ache, their stomach never quite fills. But sometimes, just sometimes, one of the dogs nudges their arm after a long rotation. And in that soft, wordless moment, they feel acknowledged. Not by castle hands or cooks, but by something alive. And for now, that's enough. Because in a place like this, even the smallest warmth, a steady breath, a dog that doesn't bite, becomes worth clinging to. Especially when the fire never fades. And the wheel never stops. They fall asleep to the pattern of paws thudding wood. They wake to the same sound, as if the night itself were turning slowly on a spit. They rise before dawn, in cold and dark. The castle's walls offer no comfort, not to people like them. The hearth embers are long extinguished. Their breath fogs in the air above a rough, scratchy blanket. They sit up, every joint stiff from the previous day. Their hands ache, and they haven't even touched water yet. They are Therese, which means water, soap, flame, and pain. They dress in silence, pulling on a woolen skirt still damp from yesterday. It smells of smoke, tallow, and old lye. The apron follows, salt stiffened by sweat and splashes from boiled linens. A scarf wraps around their hair. Their feet slide into cracked leather shoes, and already they move like time slipping through their fingers. Because it is. Most of the castle still sleeps as they tread quietly through cold stone hallways, arms hugging a basket of yesterday's laundry. Shirts yellowed with sweat, undergarments damp with fear, napkins stained with wine, or worse. Some items belong to nobles, and any mistake, any fading, tearing, shrinking, might be met with fury. They've witnessed girls lose their positions over a scorched tablecloth, and they themselves narrowly escaped punishment for a misplaced shift. At the courtyard, they fill 2 wooden buckets from the well. The pump creaks, the water splashes loudly against the hush of dawn. Balancing both buckets on a yoke, they bear the load across their shoulders. It cuts into their skin as they make their way past the smokehouse, beyond the scullery, until they reach the yard where a soot-blackened copper cauldron rests above yesterday's ashes. With unsteady fingers and a flint stone, they coax a fire to life beneath the pot. As steam curls from the surface, smoke sharpens the air, and their hands flush red from the cold. Into the heating water, they stir in a scoop of lye, carefully prepared the week before from hardwood ash. The mixture clouds instantly, and they stir it with a long wooden paddle, cautious not to splash. Their arms still bear marks from where the caustic water scalded them days ago. While the lye water heats, the laundry is sorted, rough fabrics in one pile, fine linens, particularly the lord's shirts and the ladies' underthings, handled separately with quiet reverence. Not for what they are, but for the consequences if they're returned damaged. Woolens remain aside. They know better than to boil wool. They've watched a full cloak turn into a doll's garment in a single careless moment. The soaking begins. Fabrics lower into the lye-scented water, stirred softly to loosen grime and odour. Then the scrubbing follows. At the flat stone slab near the well they kneel, pressing a servant's tunic to the rock. Soap, black, made from tallow and lye, is worked into the cloth. It's rough on the linen, harsher on their hands. Their knuckles whiten with every stroke. The soaked fabric resists them. Rinsing comes next. They dunk the tunic in a barrel of water, which immediately turns cloudy. That brings the smallest smile. Progress. But the rinse water bites. It's so cold their fingers stiffen within moments. Still, they keep going, switching hands, squeezing fingers, blowing on them to keep circulation flowing. Others suffer the same. The scullery girls, the firewood hauler, cold unites them, if nothing else. Once the worst dirt is gone, they gather the linens and head for the stream beyond the outer wall. There, in the chilly shallows, they beat the heavy pieces, sheets, long tablecloths, with a wooden paddle. Swinging, striking, again and again, water flinging up sleeves, soaking arms. Each hit drives out more dirt. Each splash chills deeper. Their knees numb in the mud. Other washerwomen join them, women from the nearby village. No one speaks. No one needs to. Only water, wood, and the occasional breath or sigh break the silence. When linens are finally clean, rinsed, beaten, and hand-wrung in a process that sets their shoulders ablaze, they stretch them across bushes or string them between trees. In warmer months, the sun finishes the work. In the winter months, they hang the linens near the hearth, quietly hoping the fabric stays clear of the flames. Damp cloth and fire are never the best of neighbours. They tend the embers once more, stir the simmering pot, fetch another round of water. The rhythm takes over. Haul, soak, scrub, wring, hang. The hours slip by unnoticed. By midday, their arms no longer feel like their own. Come afternoon, their back tightens, twisted into a knot of tension. Yet somewhere in that repetition, a moment offers reward. The lady's veil, once stained deep with wine, comes out spotless. They lift it up, steam rising in the cool air, white against a darkened sky. For a heartbeat, pride flickers. Then they notice the fraying hem. A quiet sigh. It'll need patching, and they can only hope no one will see. When the last cloth is swaying gently in the wind, they finally rest, easing onto an upturned bucket for a breath. From a pocket, they pull a crust of hardened bread, dry, old, but still food. They chew slowly, eyes tracing the fluttering linen like sails in a quiet sea breeze. And then it begins again, gathering what's dry, folding stiffened shirts with fingers that can barely grip. They check each one for mist stains or patches still damp. The noble garments go in a separate basket, a protective cloth between every piece, as though layering armor. These will be delivered by hand. No words, no eye contact. They step softly, blending into the stone. At the kitchen door, a scullery maid greets them with a tired nod. She smells of fish, onions, and a long day's labour. Inside, the cook yells about lost rags. Without a word, they pass over a bundle of folded cloths. A grunt is all the thanks they get. They're gone before the cook can place their face. The last stop is the Lord's Solar. A knock. A servant answers. The basket is offered with a bow, one rehearsed and exact. The door shuts behind it. No words again. Their hands ache, their shoulders throb, but nothing was ruined, nothing misplaced. That counts as a success. Back in the laundry yard, they douse the fire, empty the tubs, and rinse the stones. A wind-blown sheet lies crumpled in the mud. They grab it before anyone notices, only a touch of dirt. It'll be washed again tomorrow. No complaints. There's no use. As the sun dips behind the battlements, they sit one last time, palms open to the fire's fading warmth. The sting returns to their hands. Nails chipped, skin peeling, but still functional. Tucked inside their apron is a scrap of cloth, once part of a ruined towel. They've been sewing it into a handkerchief slowly, in quiet moments. Not tonight. Still, knowing it's there, a small personal thing, gives them comfort. Later they'll eat in the servants' hall. Pottage again. They shared bread and warm ale, eating with quiet urgency, heads lowered and voices hushed. Then they made their way back to the pallet, tucked near the chimney. The day was done. Another would come, full of water, soap, fire and ache. But for now they could rest. When all the linens had been hung, their steam curling gently in the afternoon air, they paused a moment, perched on an old bucket, simply breathing. From the apron's pocket came a piece of hardened crust, tough and stale, but still something to eat. They chewed slowly, eyes following the fabric as it danced in the wind. Soon enough they were back at it, gathering the dry, folding each shirt, still crisp and cold. Every piece was inspected, checked for lingering stains or unnoticed dampness. The noble garments were given special care, each folded item layered with cloth, like quiet armor. These they would deliver by hand. No words, no eye contact. Their steps were silent, their presence deliberately unnoticed. They had to remain unseen. At the kitchen entrance, they nodded to the scullery maid, who smelled of fish, onions, and weariness. Inside, the cook shouted about misplaced cloths. Without a word, they offered up the bundle of folded rags. A grunt followed, something like thanks. They slipped away before the cook could recall their name. The last stop brought them to the Lord's Solar. A knock. A servant opened the door. With practiced care, they handed over the basket, bowed without waiting for acknowledgement. The door shut again. No thanks given. Their hands stung. The back of their neck ached. Their spine felt pulled into knots, but nothing had gone missing, and nothing was ruined. That made the day a good one. Back at the yard, they tended to final tasks, extinguishing the fire, emptying the tubs, rinsing the stones. A sheet had blown free, lying half in the mud. They caught it quickly, unseen. Only a smudge. Easy to clean again tomorrow. No complaints. Complaints wouldn't change anything. At last, as the sun slipped behind the battlements, they returned to the bucket once more. This time they sat longer. Hands extended toward fading heat. Nails cracked, fingertips flaking, but still usable. In their apron, a scrap of cloth remained, a salvaged bit from a ruined towel. They had begun sewing it into a handkerchief, quietly, in spare moments. No time for that tonight. Still, knowing it was there offered something that belonged only to them. Dinner was simple: pottage, bread, ale. They ate quickly without speaking, then headed to the pallet near the chimney. Their work was finished. Tomorrow would repeat. Water, soap, fire, and pain. But tonight at least there was sleep. They had seen this before. When a mare rolled too much, it could twist something inside. They had thrown open the stall, halter in hand. She thrashed and nearly caught their leg, but they held on. They walked her in tight circles, whispering gently, keeping her eyes moving. The stable master arrived eventually, barking curses and taking over. They stepped back, arms trembling, covered in spittle and dirt, their tunic torn. But the horse stood again, and that mattered. Back to the routine. 2 new travellers had come, their horses jumpy from the journey. Soft words, steady hands, comforting them as best they could. One nipped at a sleeve, one stomped, missing a toe by inches. Troughs were filled again. Hay fetched once more, the aisle swept for a 3rd time. They repaired a torn girth strap using twine and an old bone needle. It wasn't elegant, but it would hold. The sun dipped behind the walls. The wind stirred again. They closed the stable doors for the night. They latched the stable doors, hung up the lanterns, and moved down the row for a final check. Each horse received a gentle pat, their hooves inspected, the water buckets topped off. Smoke got a firm rub along the neck. Gores earned a cautious step back, and Willow, dear Willow, enjoyed a scratch behind the ears. When every task was finished, they climbed the ladder to the hayloft above. The boots came off with effort, the raw soles flexed in quiet relief. Dust clung to their skin, hay stuck to their tunic, and sweat traced the lines of their back. But nothing had caught fire, no one had been kicked, and all the horses remained safely in their stalls. That by any standard was a success. Up in the loft they unwrapped a second meal, cheese earned through a quiet favour, and a slice of onion bread, too stale for the kitchen to serve but still good enough to chew. Knees tucked in, arms around themselves for warmth, they sat in silence. Outside, the castle shimmered faintly under torchlight. Laughter drifted up from the great hall. Somewhere a minstrel teased notes from a lute, soft, distant, like a dream someone else was having. Below, the horses shifted in their sleep. A snort here, a soft whinny there. They too were settling for the night. In the straw they lay back with arms folded behind their head. Joints ached, knees popped when stretched, and their spine felt carved from timber. But they were alive, and the animals were safe. That was enough. They thought briefly about all the tales, of knights, of kings, of victory and valour. No one ever spoke of the stable boy who saddled the steed, mucked the stalls, and whispered calm into the ears of the warhorse before battle. That was fine. They weren't in this for memory. They were here to work, and then, if lucky, to sleep. The wind tapped against the shutters below. Hooves scuffed softly in the dark. And slowly, steadily, the exhaustion of the day cradled them down into sleep. Their final thought was of a hoof print, perfect in shape, edged with frost, still steaming from the warmth of the animal that had made it. It would vanish by morning, but for now it was real, just like they were. They woke with a start. The butt of the spear still rested in their hand. Just a moment of sleep, nothing more. The brazier nearby had dulled to embers, orange and quiet. Rubbing tired eyes, they adjusted position on the cold stone bench, peered through the narrow slit in the wall. Still night, still fog, still their watch. They weren't a knight, not even a soldier with songs behind his name, just a castle guard. And if something ever went wrong, they'd be the first to fall. It was their second night shift this week, and their joints already throbbed. They rolled one shoulder, wincing at the bruise left from yesterday's training. The sergeant had called it a learning moment. They called it something else, silently. The job was simple. Watch the gate, walk the wall, listen for the hour bell, and above all, stay awake. They paused. Somewhere distant, a bell echoed through the fog. Still 5 hours till dawn. The wind hissed through the murder holes above, steady and sharp. They pulled their cloak tighter. The wool was thin, standard issue, and didn't help much. Breath coiled out into the torchlight like smoke from fading fire. They rose and began a slow circuit of the gatehouse interior, footsteps measured and quiet, as the castle kept its secrets and the night stretched on. The stone beneath their boots remained slick with old moisture and soot, remnants of long-burning torches. Every crack, every uneven flagstone had become familiar. Too many laps around this route to forget. When they stepped out onto the outer parapet, the wind struck harder, tugging at their cloak and pressing chill into their legs. Below, the courtyard rested in a hush. A stray dog nosed along the kitchen entrance, Somewhere to the left, a drunk stumbled out of the barracks latrine, muttering a half-tune and failing to shut the door behind. They didn't shout. Not their concern. Not tonight. Their hand found the iron hinges of the portcullis gate. Still shut, still rusted, still their duty. If it jammed during an attack, the blame would fall squarely on them. The metal was ice under the glove. They thought for a moment of the day shift, warmer, filled with sunlight and voices, but crowded, loud, and always under inspection. The night was different, lonely, forgotten, until something went wrong. Then, suddenly the night guard mattered. Back inside, they lowered onto the stone bench again, head tipping gently to lean against the wall. The helmet lay beside them, too heavy for hour 7 of silence. One hand rested across the spear shaft, gripping it like a cane, a companion or both. A sound drifted from beyond the gate, not speech, not quite a step. They stood too quickly, knees groaning in protest. One breath held, the spear readied. Then, nothing. Perhaps a bird. Perhaps frost shifting the wood. They stood still a moment longer, then sighed and returned to the bench. Just nerves. Still, vigilance couldn't be spared. They sat again slower this time. Every joint murmured in protest. A strip of dried meat emerged from their pouch, cold, hard, with a bit of gristle clinging to it. They chewed slowly, jaw aching. Dinner. Once, a young noble passed and sneered at that meal, pastry in hand, silken cloth at his wrist. They hadn't replied, just kept chewing. That's what they did. Chew, watch, stand. Until they couldn't. Their mind returned to the first winter on this post. Numb toes, purple fingers, skin split from the cold. They'd learned to line their boots with wool, to wrap cloth beneath the gloves, greased against the wind. It helped a little. Midnight bells echoed. Time to move. From the eastern tower to the west they walked, past armory and chapel. At the chapel window, light flickered faintly. The priest was awake again. He too never seemed to rest. They climbed to the war walk, peering beyond the bailey. Black trees swayed like ink through fog. The moon left a pale streak across empty fields. All was quiet. And yet they saw everything. A thought slipped in. Mother's orchard, harvest moons, the smell of cider. Was she still there? They hoped so. By the time they returned to post, the brazier had died down to cold stone. They didn't relight it. The cold kept them alert. Sometime after the final bell, the captain arrived. His boots echoed as he entered. No words at first, just a glance, a nod, the ledger checked, the pike rack tapped with the haft of his halberd. Still breathing? He asked barely. Mostly, they replied. He gave a grunt, then passed on, silent again. He never said, "Good work." They weren't standing guard to be applauded. They were there simply because someone had to be. After the captain's departure, they stretched again, rotating their shoulders slowly. The fog had begun to lift. A pale glow spread across the eastern sky. Soon, bells would call for morning prayer, and their shift would draw to a close. The day watch would take over, alert, clean-shaven, voices bright with rest. They'd nod, pass along the spear, and slip back into quiet anonymity. Descending the winding stairs of the tower, they moved toward the barracks. The cot waiting for them was rough. The blanket carried the scent of mildew and smoke. Still, it was theirs. Cloak removed, boots lined up neatly, they sat for a moment unmoving before finally lying down. Just as their eyes began to close, the castle stirred. Orders echoed in the yard, buckets clattered, and the cook's voice rang out. They had earned this rest. Yet they already knew. They would return tonight. The fortress never watched itself. A memory surfaced. It hadn't faded. Just last year, desperate bandits had tried to break through. Not a full-scale raid, just 6 or 7 men, half-starved, fueled by stolen drink, arrived past midnight, expecting the watch to be lax. But they hadn't been. The bell had been rung, the call had gone out, and the gate held long enough for others to ready themselves. One, tall with an axe, nearly reached the portcullis. But they had met him, spear first. The steel pierced his ribs and he collapsed, gasping into the earth. That night they didn't sleep, not for 3 days. There had been no parade, no thanks. A crust of bread from the steward. A short nod from the sergeant, who merely said, "You did your job." "Merci, the That was all. Eventually the wounds closed, the frostbite faded, and they were placed again at the gate, not as punishment, but because now they were trusted to stay awake. That was the reward. Shifting slightly, their hip gave a dull throb, years of leaning against cold stone. They ignored it, as they had learned to ignore many things: hunger, the biting cold, dismissive glances from nobles, and the ever-present thought that they might be the first to fall should danger come again. And yet, through all of it, something deeper endured. A quiet pride. Not the kind toasted with wine in the great hall, but the sort that let one stand tall even in the dark when no one was watching. They protected the castle. That meant something, even if unseen. One last adjustment to their gear. The leather jerkin had cracked straps, iron studs dulled with time. The helmet, rim-dented from service, hung by the bunk. It ought to be replaced, but it still did the job. All around the others slept. Deep breaths filled the quiet. One snored softly, another twitched, caught in some dream battle. They envied them. Their part was done. Now came rest. Turning on their side, they stared at the wall. The mortar lines traced paths like roads, twisting, uncertain. Their eyes followed them until they blurred. Above in the solar, nobles stretched beneath feathered quilts. Below they lay with a knife under their pillow, and their cloak wrapped close. Around their feet the cold gathered like a mist. And even now, if anything were to go awry in the stillness of night, they would be the first called upon, because that's what those on night watch were there for. They allowed their eyes to close, and for a brief, precious span, there was nothing to guard, nothing to hear, nothing to fear. Rising without sound, not because others around them were asleep, but because most had already long since disappeared. The scullery maid curled beside the hearth. The stable boy vanished into straw. Somewhere in the distance the cook's snoring echoed faintly from the kitchens. But their duties began now. In these hollow hours no one else would claim. They were the night watch woman, not quite a soldier, not armoured, and never armed with a sword, but each corridor they walked with care, lantern in one hand, a ring of keys in the other. If something flared, if a scream pierced the silence, or if movement stirred where it should not, they would be the one to face it. They wore quiet shoes, the soles patched with bits of cloth, designed to leave no sound in their wake. That was the rule, no echo. Their wool dress was plain, layered thick beneath to battle the chill, for these hallways grew cold enough to bite. With a soft click, the lantern came to life. The tallow candle inside flickered gently, throwing long shadows across the stone. The nursery came first. 2 noble children slept uneasily beneath heavy embroidered covers. Their names weren't known, but their habits were. Which child ran a fever, which one wet the bed. The blanket was tucked with gentle hands before they slipped out again, unseen. They continued on to the hallway of tapestries, those woven murals of battles, glories, and nights long since turned to dust. As they passed, the candlelight danced in the glassy eyes of warriors long dead. A soft creak echoed behind them, but they didn't turn. Their job wasn't to be frightened. The library came next. It was locked, as it should be, but they tested the handle anyway. Last time someone forgot, rats had gnawed through precious parchment. The steward had shouted about it for days. Tonight the door held firm. They moved on. In the chapel, a votive candle still burned low. They paused, not out of disrespect, but caution. Just last winter, a stray ember had nearly set fire to the drapes. They touched the iron base, ensuring it was cool before leaving it behind. A narrow stair awaited, winding up through the keep. They climbed again, lantern raised high, though their legs already throbbed. This was their 3rd round tonight, and the castle was vast. Their pace was steady, never rushed, never dawdling. Their ears stayed attuned to the castle's familiar sounds, creaking beams, skittering mice, the quiet drip of moisture down stone. Every note of the place was known, what belonged and what didn't. In the east wing they found a window ajar. That wasn't right, it should have been latched hours ago. No one had reason to open it. They knelt, placed the lantern down, and shut it with care. They said nothing. The steward scoffed at stories of ghosts. But deep down they believed. They moved on to the laundry chamber next. Earlier, warm linens had hung in long rows beneath the beams, now stiff and chilled by the air. One item caught their eye, a noble's cloak tugged gently from the line. Someone had left it too near the wall torch. The hem sadly was scorched. A soft sigh escaped them. Better to fix it before anyone saw. Folded neatly under one arm, the cloak would be mended quietly during the final dark hour before dawn, when the fire burned low and their hands, worn with fatigue, began to tremble. Their steps carried them into the kitchen corridor. A pot sat forgotten on the hearth, its steam faint but present. Lifting the lid revealed onion broth, thin, sour, but warm. They dipped a piece of dry bread into it, careful not to take too much, just enough to remind themselves they were still human. Meals weren't shared with the others, their duties never aligned. No one left a bowl waiting. But they discovered hidden corners where a wedge of cheese lingered, or a wrinkled apple rested. The cook never said a word. Maybe she looked the other way. Maybe she once walked these halls as they did now. At the base of the stairway to the Lord's Solar, they paused. Ascending wasn't allowed. That stair belonged to another world, one of featherbeds, warmed slippers, and voices that gave orders, not followed them. All they could do was look up, then turn away. They headed toward the servants' dormitory. A soft cry broke the silence behind one closed door. They knocked gently. A mother appeared, eyes clouded with sleep. Wordlessly, they handed her a flask of warm water. She nodded in gratitude. No more needed to be said. As they left, they felt the castle breathe around them. Not haunted exactly, just heavy, alive with memory. Each stone beneath their steps had once been scrubbed by countless hands. The arch overhead was carved by someone now long buried. But rather than shrinking beneath that weight, they felt anchored by it. That feeling carried them forward. The final round began as night surrendered to pale blue. The lantern was fading. A slight tilt coaxed the last bit of light from the stubby candle, its flicker dancing along the walls like restless ghosts. Through the lower storerooms they wandered, eyes scanning for anything amiss. This was where trouble began. Rats, or sparks. A small fire here could consume the entire keep. Something was off. The armory door stood slightly ajar. That shouldn't be. Their pulse quickened. They stepped inside with only their keys and their voice. No weapon. They checked the racks, swords, pikes, axes, each accounted for. Along the rear wall nothing stirred. Perhaps it had been wind, or careless hands. Still they closed the door with care and bolted it tight. At last they settled on the bench near the hearth. The lantern rested at their side. The cloak, still folded, was drawn out. Needle and thread in hand, they began the quiet task of mending. The stitches were slow, deliberate, familiar. They had done this many times before. Just as the final knot was tied, the morning bells began to ring. The castle once again began to wake. Someone stirs. A door creaks. A low groan escapes from somewhere nearby. Morning is creeping in. They fold the cloak and hang it back on its peg, fingers moving slowly. Climbing the steps to their small cot above the linen stores, a space barely more than a wooden shelf, they tuck their legs beneath their skirt, curl into themselves like a sealed envelope, and shut their eyes. The castle seems to breathe around them. At last they sleep. There are strange quiet moments in the middle of the night when they lose track of time entirely. The keep becomes a world all its own, wrapped in stillness, draughts, and flickering shadows. The old stones seem to inhale and exhale. The rafters shift and groan. Over time, they've learned which creaks mean wind and which hint at weakened timber. Inside their apron is a tiny cloth pouch of salt, not for flavouring stew, but for keeping safe. An old cook once said that salt wards off dark things, that if anything unnatural were ever to appear in the corridor, they should toss the salt at its feet. They never had to. Still, the pouch remains. Along the east corridor, just outside the old chapel, there's a patch of stone colder than all the rest. Doesn't matter the season. They always step around it. A habit. No one ever talks about it. Sometimes when a nobleman's mistress slips silently through the halls at night, they look away. Eyes lowered, footsteps quiet. Secrets aren't theirs to hold, but they are theirs to carry. Once they spotted the steward stealing candles, taken straight from the chapel to warm his private quarters. Their gazes met, but no words passed between them. Days later, they found a thick blanket folded neatly on their cot. No note. They never spoke of it. These are the quiet exchanges that hold the castle together. Small favours repaid in hushes, in blankets, in stitches sewn under low candlelight. They've become fluent in this silent language. When the hush deepens just before birds stir, they sometimes pause beneath the great window that overlooks the courtyard. The lantern hangs low in their hand. They look up. Above, the stars glimmer, distant, cold, unreachable, yet always there. No matter how rough the day or what was ruined or lost, the stars return, and that gives them comfort. Their mother once said the night had ears, that it listened kindly to the women who laboured while others dreamed. Maybe it does. They've whispered a fair share of wishes into that quiet. Simple ones, practical ones, none ever answered. Still being heard brings peace. They take a breath, long and slow. Arms stretch, legs shift. Then they resume their walk, past the same doors, through the same shadows, checking the same locks. Because someone must. Because someone always has. And tonight, like so many nights before, that someone is them.